NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. The voters have spoken in the August 2nd primary election here in Tennessee. It's going to be Republican Bill Lee versus Carl Dean of the Democratic side for governor. On the U.S. Senate race, it's going to be Congressman Marcia Blackburn, against former Governor Phil Bredesen coming up in November. But what does last night's election or Thursday night's election mean? And what happens going forward into the fall campaign with the general election coming in November? To give us his insights and knowledge, we welcome back to the show Professor Marc Schwerdt from Lipscomb University. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it.
You watched the returns as I did coming in last night. What was your first takeaway from all of that?
Well, my first takeaway was that obviously the polls underestimated Lee's ability to win this race. The polls were, the ones that we had, again, there were not that many, basically told us this was anybody's game.
Was this a situation where Lee, obviously, from a preponderance of the polls, whether you believe the actual numbers, was surging in the race, and it's sometimes late, it's hard to tell the strength of a surge, and his obviously was quite strong.
It was, and I think a lot of that probably had to do with the negative turn that his opponents took that he decided not to do, because that kind of like is the cementing kind of choice, because a lot of the positions that the candidates were taking, the fact that they were all Republicans, all of them were taking on the conservative mantle, all of them were embracing a Trump type policies and that kind of thing, on many issues they were very interchangeable. Not going negative may have been what gave Bill Lee the distinction of being the one to choose.
So his response to the attack, as the high road, as he seemed to try to take, although there was an implicit attack of why would you want to vote for somebody who would put up an ad like this, it worked for him. It was probably the key factor in the race.
That, and also, as probably goes along maybe with the Trump name a little bit more, is the outsider status. That combined with his stance.
Bill Lee will be the most politically inexperienced, if you're going to put it that way. If the Republicans were looking for a fresh face, for an outsider of the four of them in the race, he was by far the most outside politics. He'd done very little except maybe some business lobbying up on the Hill. So is that a good thing going into the fall? Well, I think he'll have a different audience in the general election.
He'll have a different audience in the general election, and I think it will help him, because support for Trump among Republicans is at a very high rate, higher than most every other president we have. So if you're looking at this from a standpoint of, okay, are there national things influencing things at the local level, then Lee seems very well positioned. If you look at things from across the state, Trump did very well. This is a fairly Republican state.
You think he's still pretty popular in the state, too? He's not as popular as he was when he carried the state in 16, but he's still...
Sure. I think he really is, and I think also what you've got is maybe a couple of things. People have cooled off a little bit on him now that they've seen him in office, but things are going well. You know, unemployment rates, unemployment rates are very low. And the thing that probably is in Lee's probably negative column right now is he's somebody who can run on economic issues in terms of being a businessman, in terms of being supportive of Trump policies and things like that. But he also seems to be sort of embracing sort of cultural issues and social issues. And we don't know how that's going to play with independents.
One other thing I think that it has to be looked at last night was the difference in size of how many people voted in what primary. The Republican primary was at least 2 to 1, if not more, over what the Democrats had. If Carl Dean had been a candidate in the Republican primary, he would have finished second, but the amount of vote out there, he's got to manufacture more Democrats or independents or bring some Republicans over if he's going to narrow up the difference.
He does. And, you know, he's got to look at, okay, the last time that we had an empty seat with no incumbent was 2010. Bill Haslam won that race decisively against Mike McWhorter. Then you go back to the previous one.
The Democrats probably have a stronger candidate this time?
They do have a stronger candidate. That is very true. But they're probably not as in strong a position, because maybe there just aren't as many strong Democrats out there now. You
mentioned Governor Haslam. He's been on the sidelines for the most part. He is now on the team with Bill Lee. He probably sees this election as part of his legacy.
Sure.
It would also be history-making, because right now the Democrats and the Republicans have switched the office every time there's been a term limit. Voters have not only changed governors, but they've changed parties. This time, if the history's right, it's the Democrats' time. Is that a sign, perhaps, that Tennessee, while it looks very red, may be more moderate than people think?
I think it certainly would. I think that would be without question. If you're going to vote for Carl Dean, who is a very dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, is a very moderate personality, is a big city mayor. You know, you're not talking about somebody who is going to reach over and start embracing conservative type policies if we're going to associate Republicans with being conservative in that way, being dark red.
So you think Karl Dean's strategy may be to push Lee more and more into the social issues that are divisive, which may in turn divide his vote a little bit, maybe, depending on the size of it?
Well, I think what they're both going to be fighting over is the independent vote. And the independent vote has definitely slid away from Republicans over the last year and a half, and they seem to be favoring Democrats.
Looking at last night's numbers, there was no indication the Republicans are going to lose any seats in Congress. In the delegation here, it's 7-2 Republican, likely to stay that way. Very little indication the Republicans are going to lose much if there's supermajority in both houses of the legislature. Yet we go into both the Senate and the statewide race for governor, and the Democrats are very competitive. That would that would seem to be rather odd.
It would. But it goes along with the federal system. The fact that you only have districts where one person can win, everything is driven by local things. Statewide, things are much more evenly
balanced. So the Republicans have done a really, they drew these lines, and they did a very good job of drawing them to maximize Republican vote, and that's probably going to, at least in those two areas, going to save their bacon for this November. Diane Black, everybody thought she was the front runner. Suddenly she comes out and starts attacking. What happened to her? She had the highest name recognition numbers and some favorability. There were some negative numbers. Did those ultimately overtake her?
Well, I think the unfavorability certainly became a bigger issue because people started comparing her to other people. I mean, that's the thing about any kind of election.
They started to know the other candidates in the race, particularly Bill Lee.
It's not about the qualities of this person or their assets or anything like that. It's then, okay, what's my comparison, my choice between this candidate and this candidate, or in this case, between these four.
And Bill Lee and his television in particular turned out to be a lot better candidate maybe than people thought. I mean, he could look down the barrel of a camera and really connect with voters, I thought, with
his sincerity really came across. And he was very calm, he's very reassuring, and he comes across as someone who is not naive. He's not this sort of coming in from the outside that, okay, I really don't know what's going on.
Professor Marc Schwerdt from Lipscomb University is our guest. We're talking about the Thursday primary and what it means going towards the November election for both the election for governor and for the U.S. Senate. Back to continue our conversation with the professor after you watch these messages.